IMAP, which is the International Media Association for Peace. That's one of the associations of the Universal Peace Federation. And the International Media Association for Peace recognizes the vital role that journalists play in guarding against totalitarianism and supporting the expansion of freedom. IMAP represents a worldwide professional network of journalists who support a socially responsible and moral media to convey accurate content, address the challenges of our time based on the highest principles of ethical journalism, and understanding that universal values are key elements of a world of peace. And each month we produce a webinar, and some of our recent topics have been media's responsibility to defend religious freedom, the role of media in advancing civility in the public square, and the impact of social media on marriage and family. And our topic today is toxic polarization, what's to be done? America is often referred to as a melting pot. However, stark divisions have appeared along political, moral, and racial fault lines. How is it possible to de-escalate this rhetoric? Media has played a role in creating the current atmosphere of demonization, so perhaps it can help us to gain a more balanced perspective. So we have three wonderful panelists today that'll be joining and giving a presentation today. Dr. Chris Foreman, he is the network lead for Deliberation Gateway and also a Braver Angels ambassador. And Dr. Frank Kaufmann is president of 12 Gates Foundation and the founder of the Settlement Project. And Ms. Cheryl Wetzstein is a senior advisor with the Times Global Media Group and also a former reporter for the Washington Times. And our moderator today is Peggy Ujiri. Peggy lives in Denver with her husband, Kenji, and they have 3 adult children. And she serves as the executive director of UPF in Colorado and has over 40 years of experience in organizing and promoting intercultural and interfaith events in the U.S. and internationally. So, Peggy, we're very happy to have you with us today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ray, for that introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I want you to know that no matter what you may already know about polarization or what kind of views you may hold on it, you're in for a treat because we have some very knowledgeable presenters today who have decades of experience in things like conflict resolution, deliberative democracy, and policy analysis. So I think we're in for a real treat, and let's keep an open mind and be willing to get some new ideas and take a new view on this topic. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker. It's Dr. Chris Foreman. And Dr. Foreman is a seasoned scientist with 24 years of experience at, oh boy.
Kinetic.
Kinetic. Oh, Kinetic. And also at Cambridge University, Northwestern University, and Tasso Biosciences. His math and simulation-based expertise spans satellite communications, protein engineering, nanotechnology, and chromatography. I'm sorry. 6 years, Chris has served as the network lead for Deliberation Gateway, a thematic network of the Royal Society for the Arts, and more recently became a Braver Angels ambassador. And about the Royal Society for the Arts, I think Chris is originally from Britain. Is that right, Chris?
That is correct. Yeah, I am British. Yeah.
He's an advocate for deliberative democracy, which is an approach to collective decision-making applied in democracies around the world. Motivated by the vision of a regenerative economy, Chris is interested in political innovation as a means to go beyond activism to address effective environmental stewardship. He passionately supports the concept of deliberative democracy, empowering ordinary citizens to play a significant role in politics dominated now by corporations and private interests. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Foreman.
Thank you so much. I will share my screen. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to be invited to this event. I'm really, really excited to be here. So toxic polarization, what is to be done? That's quite a weighty title. I'm actually here with two hats: Braver Angels, which is an organization that exists to depolarize the United States, and also as the founder, sort of director of Deliberation Gateway, which is part of the RSA, and we're using it to explore deliberative democracy. So because I've got two topics, I'm going to sort of just jump right in, give you the sort of the brief notes of both of these things, and hopefully that will give you an idea of what both of these organizations are about. So, Braver Angels is summarized by this quote. Abraham Lincoln needs no introduction. I do not like that man. I must get to know him better. This is what he would say. And this summarizes the ethos of Braver Angels completely. It's an organization which exists to help people connect to people who have different points of view than themselves in the United States.
Dr. Foreman, I don't want to interrupt him. I just
That's
want
okay.
we're not seeing your slides.
You're not?
We
No.
can see it.
You can?
Oh, you can? Oh,
Yes, we can see it.
Oh,
Oh.
okay.
sorry.
Not to worry. It's okay. No worries. That's fine. As long as you can see them, that's the main thing. So, yeah. But this is also the ethos at the heart of deliberative democracy, the idea that good quality argumentation has its own legitimacy. That, in fact, that's from where legitimacy derives, is the quality of your arguments. You can only have good quality arguments if all of the points of view in a room are represented. And that means people who disagree have to talk to each other. So this is really important. Of course, polarization will never not be there. Polarization will always exist. You know, until the penultimate person departs, there will always be disagreements. You know, it's like but what Braver Angels really talks about is this concept of affective polarization, and this is a concept from the literature which is about, you know, we're learning a lot more about the way human brains work. That, you know, thinking fast and thinking slow, two kind of brains: a quick animal brain and a more slow, sort of higher order, high cognitive function brain. And what happens with affective polarization is your emotions can get the better of you. When you're involved in an argument, you can get emotional. You can start making snap judgments and saying things that you know your higher order brain maybe wouldn't think about. And so affective polarization is this problem that can beset people when they're trying to have rational conversation. And it has all kinds of negative consequences. You start to see people as if they're not human beings, you know, morally compromised. Oh, those other people, they're strangers. They're not really human beings. They're different from me. And your emotions really get in the way of thinking rationally and listening to what those people are actually saying and what they are. So that's what Brave Angels concentrates on, it's not about issues. It's about people, and it's about listening to other people, and it's about understanding and learning about yourself. And in fact, once people get into these kinds of states, they're willing to do anything to defeat the opposition. They're willing to, you know, go to any lengths to beat the other people. And no one is ever willing to admit faults, you know. And so no one ever says, "Hey, I'm wrong. You know, maybe we should change this." And this is the problem when you start to get emotional about conflicts, discussions, issues. And what Brave Angels does is it brings Americans together to bridge that partisan divide. That's what its mission is. It's doing it very well. We have a number of pledges. One, we always try to understand the other side's point of view. That's why we're meeting, to understand what other people have to say. And we deliberately engage with people that we disagree with, looking for common ground. And people from all sides of the political spectrum are coming forward to listen and pay attention at the workshops that we run. And we always make sure that we have red and blue people represented equally, so that there's always a mixture of opinions and backgrounds, and it can be an incredibly wonderful experience where people actually talk to each other and listen and begin to see each other as human beings. And we've got a couple of people who are responsible for this: Bill Doherty, we've got David Blankenhorn and David Lapp. Read this gentleman, and this gentleman. Now, right after the 2016 Trump election, they got together and they were like, "We're really worried about polarization in this country. Can we do anything about it?" So they got together in a barn in Ohio, and they pulled together 6 reds and 6 blues. And in fact, Bill is a marriage counselor, and he used his techniques for marriage counseling to bring these people together and designed a process by which these people could interact with each other. And at the end of it, far from being, you know, they started off being nervous and everything at the beginning, but by the end of it, they were all just firm friends. You can see the smiles on their faces at the end of this conference, how much they all enjoyed being there. And these two are really famous within Braver Angels. You know, this is a Muslim and a Christian, and this guy went to the mosque and this guy went to a church, and they all went to, you know, became friends. You know, so it's a wonderful story. And they went around and they thought it was so successful. They tried it in a couple of places, and then they were on the radio, and the people heard them on the radio and started phoning them up. So they set up a bus and they started touring around like a campaign. You know, we're going to go around the whole country in the US to talk to people and help bring them together. And that has been going on very successfully. They've now grown and grown and grown, and there's something like 12,000 active members now, and about sort of 50 to 60,000 other people all around who are just kind of on the edges, as it were. And what do they do? Well, these groups, these alliances, there's 97 alliances across the whole of the US, of which I am in the Southeast Pennsylvania Alliance. And we organize these kind of standard workshops, and there's a whole range of different types of workshops that we can put on to help people bridge this divide. And it really is a wonderfully cathartic experience. One of our, does it work? Yes, it works. 70 to 80% of us report increased positive attitudes towards people of opposite political persuasion. 97% say that they find common ground in one-on-one conversations, having been through some of our programs. So it really is possible to undo this effective polarization and start to reach common ground once again. So there's a note of positive optimism. Our goal is not to change views on issues. We're not coming here saying, Reds, you're wrong, Blues, no, you're just not right. You know, it's about understanding the people. It's about understanding your own emotions. It's about understanding how you can change your views of who and what other people are and what they think and believe. And the hope, of course, is that we can then find much more collaborative solutions once we're talking. And that brings me to the concept of deliberative democracy, which is built on this concept that good quality argumentation has its own legitimacy. And to understand a little more about where that's coming from helps to jump back in time. And way back in ancient Athens, they used two methods to represent people in their democracy. One was lotteries and the other was elections. And Aristotle, who was an observer at that time, noted that when people were picked by lottery, much more democratic decision-making process. When they're elected by elections, you've got oligarchies. And that won't be a surprise to us in the modern world. Indeed, Jefferson and some of the other founding fathers, they designed the system in the US to create what they called a natural aristocracy. It's not about getting everybody's point of view. In fact, they were afraid of mob rule. So what they did was they thought, we need a system that can bring the natural aristocrats, the people who are enlightened and were able to make more difficult judgments, better educated. They would rise up to the top and be the people who would run the country, run the republic. And that's what they intended. And of course, that works. So far from being broken, the system is working as it was intended. But of course, the law of unintended consequences, there are consequences to that, to the quality of decisions that get made. And I put this slide together, and just very quickly, I want to zip through this chart. The idea is, you start off with the rich donors. I'm sure this is something that everybody here has experienced. People, Rupert Murdoch, the Koch brothers, all those people, they want laws and they provide money to lobbyists. The lobbyists draft legislation that goes through to the parties who argue about it in Congress, and new laws come out. And this is a very well recognized process for many of us. But then, of course, in return for looking at their legislations, the parties, they get money in their war chests and they go out to the media and social media, create these polarizing topics. And there isn't necessarily a relationship between the topics that are used in the media to polarize people and the legislation that gets voted on. And in fact, what happens over here, this just shows you, this is a paper in 2014, but data, you can think of this graph as, on the left is the probability of a policy being adopted, and on the right, the percent favoring that proposed policy change. And in a democracy, you'd expect that to be a straight line. The more people who like something, the more likely it is to go through. But when you split the demos into two, the average citizens and the economic elites, you see that average people's opinions have absolutely zero bearing on what the policies are that get introduced. But when you look at just the elites, they're the people who are choosing what happens. So this concept of polarization exists in my mind as a way to sort of control populations and to win votes. And what actually happens is nothing really to do with what is talked about. So there's some problems there. Is this the highest quality route to argumentation and legislation? Deliberative democracy says that legitimacy arises from the quality of an argument, and deliberation allows people to change position instead of doubling down and getting defensive. And Tom Atley has this wonderful quote which summarizes it for me. Under good conditions, wise public decisions can be made by small groups of ordinary citizens whose diversity makes them a microcosm of society. And the question is, how do we get the best quality decision? How do we get the possible outcomes? Is it through this electoral voting, or is it through some other mechanism? And we acquire legitimacy through process, and there are many examples. The deliberation is a very different kind of experience than a conventional town hall. You see on the left here, everybody's talking to each other in small tables, many people talking, relating to each other, often facilitated conversations with huge amounts of learning before these conversations take place or during those conversations. In a conventional town hall, you get people turning up, the usual suspects with their placards. Everybody has like a few seconds to say their piece, and there's not very good quality argumentation. And let me tell you, elected people hate town halls. It's a horrible experience to be up there on that top panel being harangued by all these people criticizing you, and they don't enjoy them. So these are kind of low quality type events, and these are much higher quality. So therefore, any decisions that get made would have a higher legitimacy according to deliberative democracy. Although, using a lottery to pick people gives you a much broader diversity of people, much more viewpoints, which again can lead, with a good process, with good conditions, can lead to high quality decisions and thus high legitimacy. Of course, when we have elections, all white, rich, powerful people, with one exception. But so we see the evidence speaks for itself there. And I wanted to show you this, but I'm not sure it's going to work. This was just a testimony from, this video isn't going to work, I can see it already, so I'm not going to try and make it happen. But this testimony is from people who came through, who went through a deliberative process, and you can hear the difference. And this is what I want to say to sort of media, that actually think about voter to voter communication. Don't think about elected to voter communication. When you have citizens' assemblies and reports from citizens' assemblies that are high trust reports, report those, the outputs of these citizens' assemblies to the other voters and let them make their own minds up about what these citizens' assemblies do. When you hear the qualitative difference in what these people are saying coming out of these assemblies, they're saying things like, there was love in that room, I'm learning about other people in my community, this is a wonderful opportunity, I feel so honored to be here. That's the kind of thing they say. Just to finish up, I just want to say, yeah, there are many examples all around the world of deliberative processes that have taken place that have given a lot of impact around the world. There's a huge number, many in the United States. And from small things, well, I say small, but local things like homelessness in Los Angeles, COVID in Michigan, gerrymandering in Michigan, this fairground in Petaluma, which we didn't hear the people from a moment ago. But it works all the way through up to huge constitutional changes, in Ireland being the big famous one. And so this is my last slide. What does Deliberation Gateway do with the Royal Society for the Arts? Well, we set up conversations online about deliberative democracy and how that intersects with different aspects of society. So we've had some on technology, non-violence, and there's one coming up in financial litigation. So we really urge people to come along, click on our links, sign up to our mailing lists and come to these conversations and learn a lot more about deliberative democracy. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening, and I'm going to stick around at the end to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Foreman. I think we'll save the questions for later, but I really applaud you for this effort. It's really amazing. And I was thinking it's just so much different if you had to get in a room and discuss a policy, or whether you just get your ballot. And most of us, I think we are tend to pick a team. We don't even look into the issue. We just say, oh, well, gee, I don't know, but let me choose this team. And so we end up getting represented by people that we often don't know much about, just because they happen to be on our team. And who's on our team just depends on, a decision we might have made years ago, and the team might have changed quite a bit since then. Anyway, thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce our second speaker, Dr. Frank Kaufmann. And thank you for coming on, Dr. Kaufmann. Frank Kaufmann is the president of the Settlement Project, and he has worked in the area of international relations and peace mediation for over 40 years, including negotiations during the first Gulf War, mediation in revolutionary centers of the southern Philippines, work in conflict zones such as Israel and Palestine, India and Kashmir, and north-south Nigeria. He has served in refugee camps in Croatia and at the Eritrea-Ethiopia border. So almost all the hotspots that are out there. Dr. Kaufmann completed his doctoral studies at Vanderbilt University. He's a widely published and a known speaker on social, cultural, and political dimensions of current affairs. Frank is also the editor-in-chief of the New World Encyclopedia, a widely used values-based general knowledge encyclopedia. Dr. Kaufmann serves on boards for several international peace organizations. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Frank Kaufmann. Oh, you're muted, Dr. Kaufmann.
Thanks very much, Peggy. Nice to see you after many years. I'd like to thank Professor Chris for that great talk. I love the last slide, the hands making the light bulb. That was cool. And Bill Dart, I run the 12 Gates Foundation, which is an interreligious peace organization. And Bill Doherty helped our organization create Braver Angels Conversations for Interreligious Dialogue. We tried to get Braver Angels to just add that, but they weren't interested. They have your mission and your hands full. So he helped us build Braver Angels Dialogues for religious conversations, which are also going very well. I'd like to thank the organizers. I'll share my screen here. So I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists. I'm also a big fan of Cheryl, but I have to wait to hear Cheryl in a few minutes. And I'd like to thank everyone who's logged on today. I've been asked to speak for 10 to 12 minutes on the topic of toxic polarization and what's to be done. This dystopia, toxic polarization, is meant to refer to what I call a mortal plague infecting America presently. This particular focus of this session is on media, perhaps as in part responsible for this current ugliness and self-destructive impulses in our country, as well as ways media might contribute towards needed healing. My first premise is that our world is full of noble, courageous journalists ready to give their lives to honor truth-telling for the sake of a better world. Although I admire honorable journalists sacrificing themselves for a better world and the indispensable service they offer, even so, I still try to avoid journalists whenever possible and have as little to do with journalists as possible. That's just a private confession. My second premise is that what is called legacy media or established media is as close to perfectly bereft of honor, having flushed decades or even over a century of hard-earned reputation and honor to wallow in an orgy of blind bias for the past 6 years. It's been painful to be a part of, to witness. I personally feel that honorable journalists have almost have to position themselves in alternative media, as unfortunate as that is. While alternative media is some balm for the blanket indoctrination that flows from established media, its problem is that it has arisen in an atmosphere of political tension. and so it tends to be one-sided politically. It is superior in its commitment to the American God-given freedoms guaranteed in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. But because it functions in an embattled environment, it itself is imbalanced from within, although it provides much needed balance in our country today. My view of a healthy America, and this harkens to the prior speaker, Professor Chris, is what I call a dialogical America. I believe America improves on the rails of full-throated dialogue among liberal and conservative citizens. All institutions, including the media, have the responsibility to create environments in which vigorous debates can take place. This trust in dialogue has been supplanted by a pernicious and dishonest enforcers of censorship culture. If this is not exposed and reversed, it will destroy America and all free societies. We are here to discuss toxic polarization, the extent of media's culpability in pouring gas on that fire, as well as possible ways media may contribute to bringing citizens back to freedom, to be able to express a point of view without getting lynched or getting imprisoned. It is my view, however, that media is downstream from two institutions and cannot have any hope to improve as a positive contributor to American culture without reform and recovery to these more central pillars of national culture. The first is education, especially higher education, and the second is religion and religious institutions. In our modern world, the media has become a powerful force that influences how we think, perceive, and behave. It shapes public opinions, dictates trends, creates narratives. However, it is downstream from education. It is a reflection of the values and principles instilled during our formative years. And unfortunately, the decline in quality education has had a direct impact on the media landscape. Colleges and universities, once revered as institutions of higher learning and intellectual growth, instead have become hotbeds of ideological bias and political correctness. Instead of encouraging critical thinking and open dialogue, they have become echo chambers, stifling diverse perspectives and free thought. As a result, the media, which draws its talent from these institutions, has lost its objectivity and fairness. The decline of truth-seeking and comfort with aggressive regimes of censoring dissenting opinions begins in the colleges, universities, and journalism schools that indoctrinate rather than educate. Whatever is called the media is made up of what universities produce to feed that industry with its personnel. But the second institution that I want to call attention to is religion, the churches and religion. These have historically played a pivotal role in shaping the moral fabric of our society. It is my view that religions have the mission to stand courageously and protect the front lines of character development, moral clarity, and civic mindedness. These are the values that once served as the foundation for our nation, values that allowed America to grow and improve for centuries, to transcend the faults and difficulties we grow out of. These are values that were once held passionately by both liberals and conservatives, and values that allow us to engage one another intensely yet respectfully. But these have been neglected. I believe these values, character development, moral clarity, and civic mindedness come entirely from the family, the core unit of society. I believe it's my view that the church and all religions in America have the sole purpose to make the difficult work of creating good families possible. And I believe that work has generally or basically been abandoned. Churches and religions should be at the forefront of defending and nurturing the family. Everything needed to become decent and respectful is provided in the family. Respect for difference, respect for tradition, courage to champion change, the encouragement to voice dissent, all of these are in the natural fabric of family life. Once the church and religions cowered from the moral stance needed to protect families, the state stepped in and is now looked upon as the arbiter of virtue. This is absolutely the path to fascism. Establishment media longs to be characterized and understood as virtuous, and so it becomes a mouthpiece for the state, determined to govern speech and even thought. The wedding between the government and media as the self-appointed arbiters of virtue leads to censorship, which leads to toxic polarization. Finally, once again, I do not put this at the feet of the media. I seek the arising of religious and spiritual forces in America that can recover the noble task of defending the importance of family. People from good families do not go to college in order to be told who to love and who to hate. They go to college and they expect their colleges to teach them the wonders of learning, inquiry, debate, and discovery. I have very much more to say about the impact and future of media because I am especially invested in this area through much of my work. To conclude, major frontiers for media reform will have to take very great consideration of social media and the emergent technologies of AI and AGI. That's an entire topic for another conversation, but I thank you very much for the chance to offer a few thoughts today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaufmann. I was very interested to hear you say that you don't put the blame at the feet of media, but rather the churches and the universities. So that's really a novel approach, I believe. So thank you very much for your sharing.
Thank you.
I want everyone to know that if you have questions for any of our panelists, you can put those in the chat and we'll get to those a little bit later. But before that, I would like to introduce our third panelist, Ms. Cheryl Wetzstein. She is an award-winning journalist with 40 years of experience in New York City and Washington, D.C. as a journalist. Prior to her retirement in 2018, she spent 33 years at the Washington Times, mostly as a national reporter, covering federal and state family policy issues. She currently serves as senior advisor to Times Global Media Group, as well as to this organization that's putting on this webinar, IMAP, the International Media Association for Peace. She and her husband, Douglas, live in Maryland, and they have 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. So please join me in welcoming Cheryl Wetzstein. Stein, sorry.
You got it. Okay, so hold on, let's get rid of, there we go. Anyway, 25 years covering nothing but conflict because I covered family issues, and there was peace and happiness in some parts of my realm that I would write about. In fact, I tried to find solutions wherever I could, but basically everything was a battle. Sex education, teen pregnancy, cohabiting, marriage, divorce, fertility, child custody, child support. I want you to know that the worst stories that I ever had to do with divorce, child custody, and child support. Because when you're fighting over children and money, it goes immediately to DEFCON 4. You're in World War III already. So all of this reporting also landed me right in the middle of the 2 most divisive issues of my career, which was abortion and gay marriage. Today, however, I want to talk about 2 of the more meaningful articles and women that I met during my decades at the Washington Times. One story is a microcosm of toxic polarization, and the other one is a macrocosm of toxic polarization. And their solutions are still similar. So let me introduce the lady I have on the left there. Her name is Arna Washington of Houston, Texas. In 1983, Mrs. Washington was a school teacher, a wife, and a mom with a beautiful, talented 26-year-old daughter named Deirdre. And one day, while Deirdre was sitting in a car in a parking lot with her boyfriend, a man came up to the car and started to argue with the boyfriend, and shots were fired, and Deirdre was killed. The gunman was arrested and sent to prison. And for the next 15 years, Mrs. Washington said she hated the name of Ron Flowers because that was the name of the man who shot her daughter. And then times got even worse for her. Her husband died, her son died, which Mrs. Washington attributed to their broken hearts. She said, "We had a happy whole family, and by 1994, my family was gone." Not only did Mrs. Washington hear Ron Flowers' name and hate it, she personally went to every
go to McDonald's and get him something fast, but don't tell
to testify that he should not be released. For Ron Flowers' part, he wouldn't even admit that he killed Deirdre. So in Mrs. Washington's mind, that man could rot in prison. But Mrs. Washington found herself in her own personal hell, grieving a life that was taken from her so senselessly. And so, locked in this toxic polarization, almost 15 years passed before there was a change for these two people. In 1998, Ron Flowers' sentence was nearing its end, and he ended up joining a prison program called Inner Change, which was part of the Prison Fellowship Ministries. You may have heard of it. Prison Fellowship Ministries was founded in 1976 by Charles W. Colson, a Nixon official who went to federal prison for obstruction of justice in the Watergate scandal. But while in prison, Chuck Colson became a Christian. And he read in Matthew 25, verse 36, that Jesus called upon his followers to minister to those behind bars, saying, "I was in prison and you visited me." So as part of the Interchange Restitution, Forgiveness, and Reconciliation program, Ron Flowers finally admitted that, yes, I killed Deirdre. And then he wrote Mrs. Washington a letter, which she did not like because it had literally, as she said, quote, "no remorse." So she wrote him and told him of her unending grief. Now, he didn't know what to do with that. So with the help of mentors, he sent a second letter, and this one was repentful. And they agreed to meet in prison, have Mrs. Washington come to see him. She was not sure she wanted to meet this man, but she did. And a God thing happened, she said. When she came to the prison, the guards brought Mr. Flowers in, who was carrying his Bible. And he personally repented to her. And he explained that how what he did was just stupid and accidental. And he choked up and he said, "I never meant to hurt your daughter." Well, Mrs. Washington just sat there quietly. And then she said she heard her daughter's voice in her heart. "Forgive him, Mother," the daughter said. And in that moment, the 15 years of torment ended for Mrs. Washington. And she said, "I reached out to Ron and I said, 'I forgive you.' And then she said, I found myself saying words I would have never believed. I could be your other mom." Ron Flowers, who had come from a very troubled home, reached over and touched her hand, and a new kind of peace began for him too. Ron Flowers was released from prison that year. He got a job, attended church. Sometimes Mrs. Washington went with him to church. And when he married in July 1999, Mrs. Washington stood by his side. Chuck Colson himself wrote about this story in the Christian Post in 2008. And he said only God could bring about such reconciliation and healing. So in the process of dissolving toxic polarization on this small scale, repeated we don't know how many times, It involved admitting a crime, making an apology, offering repentance, offering forgiveness, and allowing a new beginning to emerge. So now let's go macro. Let's talk about Rwanda's genocide, April to June of 1994. The Hutu tribe's anger at the smaller but more powerful Tutsi tribe exploded into a bloodlust that cost at least 800,000 people their lives. Almost 75% of the Tutsi population was slaughtered in those 100 days. The woman pictured here is named Immaculée Elabagiza. She is a Tutsi. And in April 1994, she was a 24-year-old college student visiting home. And when the killing started, she was given shelter by a Hutu family friend, a pastor. In fact, she was hidden away in a bathroom that was 3 feet by 4 feet with 6 other women and a girl for 91 days. During these 91 days, the women could hear the madness outside. Hutu mobs cheered and sang slogans outside the house, and the women could hear people being slaughtered. One day, the women listened to the screams of a woman being hacked to death right outside the house, and then the sounds of her baby crying all night. Then they heard the sound of dogs snarling nearby, and the baby's cries stopped. How can I forgive people who do such things? Immaculée recalled. She was a Catholic, and during her confinement, she said 27 rosaries every day, which took her almost from morning until night. The women were barely fed by the Hutu family who kept them in the bathroom, and they had to stay silent virtually all of the time. And that's because the Hutu mobs were still looking for Tutsis to kill. They periodically came into the house where the women were hiding, even checking the suitcases to see if there were children hiding there. Immaculée prayed desperately, God, if you are there, if you exist, please don't let the killers find the door to this bathroom. And one time a man came up to the bathroom door, but he didn't open it. Instead, he turned around and said to the Hutu family, well, we trust you. There is no way you can hide these cockroaches. When Immaculée left the bathroom after 91 days, she learned that her parents and 2 brothers had been killed. The murderer was a family friend, a Hutu who had treated her like a daughter and whose children had played with her. One day, she was asked to come to the prison to see the man who had murdered her family. Prison warden told her, do whatever you like, to the disheveled man who was sitting in the corner. But Immaculée refused to hurt the man. Instead, she forgave him, which enraged the prison warden. How dare you forgive a killer, he said. Don't you like your people? Didn't you like your parents? But as Immaculée explained, after 3 months of silent fasting and praying, she had discovered that forgiveness was the only way out of this hell. And when she prayed the Lord's Prayer, she recalled during those days, she couldn't hardly say the words, forgive those who trespass against me. She realized, I am lying. I am filled with anger and hate. But she also realized, I just can't take hating so many millions of people. It takes too much from me. So she called out to God to explain what to do. And she was reminded of Jesus on the cross, who asked God to forgive his tormentors because they know not what they do. She felt this is the same situation, and her anger lifted up. And now she started praying for the killers. And by the time she met her own family's killer, she was far beyond hatred. All I had to give was forgiveness, she said in an interview with me. Immaculée wrote a book about her experiences called Left to Tell, Discovering God Amidst the Rwandan Holocaust. I wrote my articles about her in 2008, and I just checked yesterday. She is still speaking out today about how to forgive the unforgivable. There's a final episode in Immaculate's story as well. A year after she went to the prison and met the murderer and the prison warden, she ran into the prison warden again. And the prison warden told her, "Child, you don't know what you did to me that day. That day you forgave a killer, changed my life." Before, he said, he had been consumed with revenge. But his pain and anger just seemed to grow and grow. When you were able to forgive him, it was the first time I realized it was even possible to forgive. And it was then that he felt free, Immaculate told me. In conclusion, I have seen that there are many paths to diffusing toxic polarization and creating harmony where there was none before. For instance, Mrs. Washington acted like Ron Flower's adopted mother until her death in 2007. In Rwanda, it has taken a generation or more for the lingering hatreds to die back, for survivors to address the trauma and the loss, for the murderers to be brought to justice and the nation to be rebuilt and reconstructed. There's still a lot of work to do. But within these and so many other terrible polarizations, the most powerful change agent seems to be the ability to set up the conditions for forgiveness, which include admitting wrong, repenting, apologizing, making restitution, accomplishing justice, forgiving, promising never to do it again, and agreeing to a new beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I mean, what touching stories those are, and what extreme examples of overcoming opposite viewpoints, and very emotional ones at that. I really appreciate your sharing. You must have come across so many stories in your years of reporting, and I think you've chosen two very poignant ones to share with us today.
They're very memorable.
So I'm going to ask EJ to bring all of our panelists up on the main screen, so that we can have some questions before we just have 8 minutes before the end of our streaming program. So I have a question here from Wayne Hankins for Professor Chris. Have you ever had a situation where an opposing viewpoint was so intolerant, so powerful, and so convinced of its correctness that no deliberation is possible? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, personally, whenever I have an argument with my wife, but I shouldn't say that. There's one time when I was in a youth hostel in France, and I met an Iraqi who Britain had just sort of, was in the process of bombing Iraq, and then this guy hated me.
For some reason, your voice is fading out.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
My microphone moved. Sorry. I was in a youth hostel in France, and this chap was Iraqi, and this was just in the Iraq War. And I tried to make friends with him. I was very young and naive. I just thought everyone could be friends with everybody, And he put his hand on my shoulder and he smacked his elbow up under my throat, and he just said, "If you ever talk to me again, I'll kill you." There was no deliberation. In that situation, I just had to stay away from that guy. But I think when you get to that situation where it gets to that extent, it's hard. I mean, the situations that Cheryl described show that it is possible after these kinds of horrendous traumas to find reconciliation, but it comes down to having the right conditions and having the right processes in place to do that. And I strongly believe that the overall behavior of our society depends on how we interact with each other. Those two things are exactly connected. And as a physicist, we see that in physics all the time, like, whether gas is a solid or liquid depends on the interactions between the particles. Obviously, it's way more complicated with humans. But yeah, I think it is possible to reach deliberative states. And the first port of call is to listen and to understand where somebody else is coming from, to listen and understand their point of view. That is step one. And you don't try to change people, you listen to them. And then you find it's yourself that changes when you begin to understand other people's point of view. And I think that those are the conditions that we try to set up in deliberations, where people are listening to each other respectfully. But once someone's in a violent situation, well, you just got to let that burn out and then come back later. I think there's not much other choice in that situation.
Well, Dr. Kaufmann, I know you've been involved in some deliberation in some very hot areas of conflict in the world where there were even wars going on. What is your take on that? You're muted, by the way.
I tend to find while conflict is hot, there's little to be done. It's fallen into the hands of secular strategists, military strategists, and the like. There is, during those times, one should be preparing for healing, and garnering the enormous resources that desire peace. They're available for constant consultation and work, but there's little access to bringing the end of hot conflict until it exhausts itself by some manner or another. That's my experience.
They have to show me the stuff about later, Cheryl. Oh.
Okay. If you're not speaking, please mute yourself. Thank you. Cheryl, I have a question. I think that Dr. Kaufmann has indicated that a lot of the problems is coming from our education system. However, it seems to me that the development of the media in recent years, where it used to be where there might have been a competition between two newspapers in one city, but now you're competing with literally thousands, maybe tens of thousands of news outlets. So it seems to me that isn't this one reason that people tend to sensationalize things and they tend to exaggerate and emphasize the differences in order to drive traffic to their particular site that's exciting emotions?
Oh my gosh. We used to live under the threat that if you get an error in your article, you will be busted back to doing obituaries. Because with obituaries, every single word in that better be right. It's the second cousin, not the third cousin, etc. And if you can't get an obituary right, you can't do anything. What's happened today is people throw things up with a jazzy headline, sensationalism, and then they walk it back literally minutes, hours, days later. You can't trust anything. It drives me mad because I was raised so strong. You have to get it right. Don't get it first, get it right, and then try to be first. But that's been thrown out the window. And secondly, this idea that journalists can't be objective. I'm telling you, I was trained with a whole generation of objective journalists. We knew to park our opinion at the door, and it never surfaces because we had ferocious editors with pens and delete keys, and they would wipe out anything that smelled like Cheryl's opinion. It never made print. And I cannot fathom what happened to all those editors. There got to be more in the pipeline. But again, if our education says that you just need to get it up first and walk it back, or that your opinion matters and you can stick it in a news story, if that's what's being taught, we really are in a state of disarray with the media.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a pause here because our hour is up. And for those who would like to stay on, we're going to have a kind of unplugged discussion. And we're going to have some more question and answer. We'll continue up to another 30 minutes, but we're going to stop the live feed. So that would be the conclusion of our program right now. That will later could be found on YouTube in the IMAP playlist and on Facebook. So EJ is going to stop our feed right now. And I want to thank everyone. If you cannot continue to stay with us, thank you for attending. We really appreciate your participation and hope that you'll share this content, which should be posted immediately after this. We hope we'll share it with friends